Students, in this video lecture we are going to discuss body cavities. Before we discuss body cavities, first of all we have to look at our body, human body. Our human body is consist of main body organ which is called trunk. The trunk starts from neck region and ends at the start of our legs. This trunk contains all the vital body organs. And from this trunk arises four appendages, forelimbs and hind limbs, which are used for locomotion and different purposes. And on the anterior surface of the trunk there is a neck which supports our head region or skull, which contain brain and nervous system. There are two main sides of our body: dorsal side, which is actually the side of our back, and ventral side, which is belly side. So dorsal side is towards the back and the ventral side is towards the belly. Now we are going to discuss different cavities present in our human body, which include different body organs. So there are two types of body cavities. One are known as dorsal body cavity and the other ones are known as ventral body cavities. So first of all we are going to discuss dorsal body cavities. So let's look at this diagram. So there are two portions of diagram. One I have taken from the ventral side of the body and one I have taken from the lateral side of the body. So both these diagrams shows the different cavities present in our body. So dorsal body cavity include two cavities, cranial cavity and vertebral cavity. Cranial cavity is present inside the skull or in the head region, which includes brain. And this brain and this cavity is surrounded by meninges, three meninges, which are known as pia mater. These meninges also contain cerebrospinal fluid, which play a very important role in the protection of the very fragile brain and vertebral column. From the posterior end of the brain, there arises a cavity which runs from anterior surface of the body to the posterior surface of the body, is known as vertebral cavity. This vertebral cavity contains vertebral column, which is also a very important part of the central nervous system, which is also protected by meninges. And meninges contain cerebrospinal fluid, which helps in the protection of the central nervous system. So there are two cavities, cranial cavity and vertebral cavity, which are known as dorsal body cavities. And if you look at this diagram, you can also see this is the cranial cavity, which include brain, and this is the vertebral cavity, which contain spinal cord, and these both cavities are known as dorsal cavities. Now let's look at the ventral body cavities. There are three types of ventral body cavities present in our body. If we look at the ventral body cavities, there are three cavities. Number one, thoracic cavity, which is present in ribs. Second one is abdominal cavity, and the third one is pelvic cavity. So now let's discuss these cavities one by one. First of all, I am going to discuss thoracic cavity. Thoracic cavity just starts where our neck ends. So thoracic cavity, which is present under our ribs, it includes some subcavities. Number one, superior cavity, which is present in the part of our lower part of the neck and the upper part of the thorax. This cavity includes trachea, which is a windpipe, and esophagus, which is a food pipe, which take food into the stomach. So these cavities, superior cavity, just up on the anterior surface of the anterior part of the thoracic cavity. Pleural cavity, which is present under our ribs, which is surrounded by pleural membranes. These cavities include lungs and protects the lungs. The third cavity is known as pericardial cavity. Pericardial cavity surrounds our heart, which include pericardium and also pericardial fluid, which protects our heart. So these three cavities which are present in under our ribs, which are known as thoracic cavity, which includes superior cavity, pleural cavity and pericardial cavity, which are very important and protective, our most important organs of our body. The next cavity is, just below the thoracic cavity, there is a sheet of muscle which is known as diaphragm. If we look at in this diagram, this is the diaphragm and this is the pleural cavity. Just below the pleural cavity, there is a sheet of muscle which is known as diaphragm, which help in the breathing mechanism. Just below the diaphragm, there is a cavity which is known as abdominal cavity. Abdominal cavity contains all the visceral organs, especially part of stomach, small intestine, large intestine, pancreas, spleen, part of liver, and some internal organs, visceral organ, which you call it visceral organ. So you can see right over here, this is a abdominal cavity. Abdominal cavity is usually surrounded by peritoneum, which protects the cavity and which protects the internal organ, visceral organs of the body. At the bottom of the trunk, there is a cavity which is known as pelvic cavity. As you can see right over here and right over here, this cavity is present in between the two coxal bone or in the pelvic region of the body, which contain urinary bladder, which can store urine, and also reproductive organs of male and female to protect these organs. So these cavities overall contain different organs of our body and protects them from the harms and shocks and from the environment. So in this way, there are two types of cavities: dorsal cavities, which include cranial cavity and vertebral cavity, while the ventral cavity include thoracic cavity, abdominal cavity, and pelvic cavity. Sometimes pelvic and abdominal cavity are combined and they are known as abdominopelvic cavity. So these three cavities totally make ventral body cavities. I hope it makes sense, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Until then, bye.